Welcome back to the deep dive. Remember all that craziness after the 2020 election? All that talk about overturning the results and all that?
Yeah.
Well, you guys wanted the inside scoop on Special Counsel Jack Smith's report about all that.
Yeah,
And we got it.
we do.
We're talking actual excerpts from the report itself, plus some fascinating related documents.
Oh, yeah.
Get ready to unpack some seriously juicy details.
It's a deep dive for sure.
This report is a real page-turner.
What we're looking at is, like a raid map
Oh, wow.
of what might have been the biggest legal battle in American history.
Okay, so rewind for a sec.
Okay.
Who is Jack Smith, and why did he write this report?
So Jack Smith was a special counsel appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland back in 2022. His job was to investigate whether anyone broke the law trying to mess with the transfer of power after the 2020 election.
Okay.
And you're right, this report wasn't optional.
Oh.
It's actually a requirement for special counsels.
Oh, okay.
They have to lay out their whole investigation, all the evidence they found,
Yeah.
and why they decided to either press charges or back off.
So it's kind of like a legal explainer.
Exactly. And the big reveal, Smith believed he had enough evidence to suggest that former President Trump was at the center of a criminal effort
Okay.
to overturn the election.
Hold on. So Trump wasn't convicted.
Nope, not exactly a conviction.
Right.
This report is more like the prosecution's opening statement
Oh.
in a trial that never happened. Smith did actually file 4 felony charges against Trump
Okay.
after finishing this report. But here's where it gets tricky.
Oh, boy.
Trump was reelected.
Yeah.
And the Department of Justice, the DOJ,
Right.
has this long-standing rule against indicting a sitting president.
Wow.
So the case was essentially put on ice.
Whoa, talk about a legal cliffhanger.
Right. The report is a glimpse into this alternate reality
Oh, wow.
where the legal battle played out.
Interesting.
It's fascinating to see how Smith connected the dots. He even included this one phone call
Okay.
where Trump asks Georgia's Secretary of State
Mm-hmm.
to, quote, find 11,780 votes.
Wait, seriously? He just straight up asked him to make up votes?
Yeah, and that recording went viral,
Oh, yeah.
causing a huge controversy. That's just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
The report breaks down several different strategies Trump allegedly used. Like, he didn't just work behind closed doors. He also publicly attacked officials who refused to help him out.
So he was using public pressure
Yes,
as part of his strategy.
precisely. And what's even more interesting
Yeah.
is the evidence suggesting Trump knew these claims about election fraud were bogus.
Oh, hold up. So he was pushing these claims.
Yeah,
Even though he knew they were fake.
that's what the report suggests.
Wow.
And it leads to a much bigger question.
Okay.
Why?
Yeah.
What was he hoping to achieve?
Okay. I need more details.
Okay.
What other schemes did the report uncover?
Well, remember all that talk about fake electors?
Oh, yeah. The report dives deep into that.
Okay.
Basically, Trump's team tried to create these alternate slates of electors.
Okay.
In states he narrowly lost,
Yeah.
these fake electors would then cast their votes for Trump,
Wow.
even though Biden actually won those states.
Whoa, they were trying to rewrite the election results. Isn't that, really illegal?
It gets at the very heart of our democracy and
Yeah.
how our elections work.
Yeah.
And the report alleges that they weren't exactly upfront about their intentions.
Oh, really?
They even tried to recruit these fake electors by claiming their votes would only count if Trump won certain legal challenges.
So they were misleading people
Yeah.
to participate in this scheme.
That's what Smith's team concluded. And to make matters worse,
Oh, gosh.
the report suggests they actively tried to hide what they were doing,
Yeah.
which, kind of implies they knew it wasn't on the up and up.
This is getting crazy. Is there more?
Oh, there's more.
Oh, boy.
The report also digs into how Trump allegedly tried to use the DOJ,
Okay.
the Department of Justice,
Yeah.
to his advantage.
Wait, what does that even mean?
It means he was putting immense pressure
Okay.
on the DOJ
Mm-hmm.
to launch investigations into these bogus claims of voter fraud.
Right.
He was basically trying to use the weight of a federal law enforcement agency
Okay.
to back up his claims
Wow.
and cast doubt on the election results.
So he wasn't just going after state officials.
Right.
He was trying to bring in the feds.
That's right. There's even a whole section in the report about Jeffrey Clark,
Okay.
a DOJ official who seemed to support Trump's claims.
Interesting.
Clark went so far as to draft a letter.
Oh, wow.
He wanted the DOJ to send to several states, basically urging them to delay certifying their election results.
Wow. So he was trying to get the DOJ to interfere
Yeah.
with state election processes. That seems pretty intense.
It raised a lot of red flags.
Yeah.
The report explains how the acting deputy attorney general stepped in and shot down Clark's idea.
Well, he knew the DOJ had no legal basis to meddle like that.
That was a close one. But what about Vice President Pence?
Right.
He was in charge of certifying the votes, right?
He was, and the report alleges that Trump and his allies launched a full-on pressure campaign to convince Pence to reject electoral votes from those contested states.
Imagine that.
He wanted Pence to just ignore the voters
Yeah.
and hand him the presidency. That's wild.
It was a pretty intense situation. The report details weeks of public statements, private meetings, even spreading false information about Pence's power to overturn the election.
But Pence didn't go along with it, right?
He did not. The report makes it clear that Pence refused to play ball. Knowing he didn't have the legal authority to do what Trump was asking, he basically upheld his constitutional duty even though Trump was breathing down his neck.
That must have taken some serious guts. So where does the Capitol attack fit into all of this? It feels like that was the climax of all this tension. You're right. The Capitol attack was the culmination of all these efforts. Remember Trump's rally in D.C. on January 6th?
That speech was all over the news.
Yeah. Well, Smith's report draws a direct line between Trump's words that day and the violence that erupted at the Capitol.
How so? Did he actually tell people to attack the Capitol?
The report presents evidence that Trump's rhetoric incited his supporters to march on the Capitol and disrupt the certification process. He used phrases like, fight like hell, and take back our country. He even mentioned marching to the Capitol himself.
So the report is saying his words directly fueled the attack.
That's the argument. And it also points out how Trump delayed his response to the violence.
Really?
Even when he finally called for peace, he was still repeating those false claims about a stolen election.
Wow. So even while the Capitol was under siege, he was still pushing that narrative.
It seems that way. The report paints a pretty stark picture of Trump's alleged intentions. And his role in what happened on January 6th.
This is a lot to process. We've talked about pressuring officials, the fake electors, the pressure on the DOJ and Pence. And now the Capitol attack. It sounds like Smith built a strong case. So how did Trump's legal team respond to all of this?
Well, before we get into Trump's side of the story, let's dig into the actual legal arguments Smith used and how he addressed potential defenses.
Okay, let's get into the legal weeds for a bit. What were the main charges against Trump? And how did the report address his potential defenses?
One of the most serious charges was obstruction of an official proceeding. Specifically related to something called the Electoral Count Act.
The what now?
Think of the Electoral Count Act like the official rule book for how we count the votes and declare the winner of a presidential election. It's a pretty big deal. Smith argued that Trump's actions, especially pressuring Pence and that whole fake elector scheme, were designed to mess with this process.
So they were saying he was trying to block Congress from doing its job officially naming the winner.
Exactly. The report is very thorough in laying out the legal basis for this obstruction charge. It even tackles potential defenses Trump might have used. Like, it makes it crystal clear that Trump seemed to know exactly what he was doing, that he intended to disrupt the process. They even cited a relevant case,
Interesting.
Fisher v. United States, to back up their argument.
So they were doing their legal homework, anticipating Trump's moves. And building a rock-solid case. What about Trump's First Amendment rights? Didn't he say this was all about his freedom of speech?
Oh, absolutely. Trump's lawyers argued that he had every right to speak his mind about the election. Even if his claims were off base.
Which, to be fair, he does have the right to free speech.
He does, but the prosecution countered that argument in the report. Saying Trump's words weren't just some protected opinion. They were using a Supreme Court case, Stephen, to argue that his speech was actually a tool for committing a crime.
Interesting.
That he was inciting illegal actions. And trying to obstruct the election process.
So they were saying his speech crossed the line. Going from protected political talk to actually encouraging criminal activity.
That's the gist of it. It's this fascinating legal debate about where free speech ends and criminal behavior begins. But the report also explains why Smith decided against some other charges.
Oh, really?
Like insurrection.
Insurrection. Wow, that's a serious charge. Why not go for it?
Well, the report says that proving insurrection is very difficult.
Oh.
For one thing, the law itself, the Insurrection Act, has never been used in this kind of situation.
Oh, right.
It's usually for people outside the government
Okay.
trying to overthrow it, not someone like Trump who was acting from within the government.
So it would have been like uncharted legal waters.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's a big gamble in a high-profile case like this. They were also worried about proving what's called incitement under something called the Brandenburg Standard.
The Brandenburg what now?
It basically means you can't be convicted just for saying something inflammatory.
Okay.
The speech has to be directly calling for immediate violence.
Okay.
And it has to be likely that violence will actually happen as a result of those words.
Got it.
It's a pretty high bar to clear.
So they thought those other charges were shaky.
Yeah.
And they focused on the ones they felt were the strongest.
That's the impression I got from the report. It shows how strategic prosecutors have to be. It's not just about having evidence.
Right.
It's about choosing the right legal path to actually win the case.
This whole deep dive really highlights just how much strategy goes into building a big legal case like this. But let's step back for a moment.
Sure.
What does all of this mean for how we understand what happened around the 2020 election and the peaceful transfer of power?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this is where Smith's report, even though it's definitely controversial, offers a pretty unique perspective.
How so?
It shows just how far Trump and his allies were willing to go to change the outcome of that election.
Wow.
It lays out all their tactics, the pressure they put on people, and the possible legal lines they crossed.
So it's like a how-to guide for messing with democracy.
Maybe not a how-to guide, but it definitely serves as a warning.
Okay.
Seeing these actions laid out in such detail reminds us how fragile our democracy can be.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is, and it really underscores how important it is to be vigilant, to hold our leaders accountable, and to protect the rule of law no matter what.
You know, reading through this report, I was blown away by how much evidence Smith's team collected.
Yeah.
We're talking phone calls,
Yeah.
emails, notes from meetings, public statements. It's a mountain of information.
It's a real testament to how thorough they were.
It's impressive.
They weren't messing around.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure they had everything.
And they weren't just taking things at face value.
Right.
They really went the extra mile to make sure the information they had was accurate, double-checking everything with multiple sources.
They were building a case that was bulletproof.
Wow.
Knowing how fiercely people would fight back against it.
It wasn't some rushed investigation. It was meticulous.
Right.
And well-documented.
And that's what makes the report so compelling.
Yeah.
Even if someone disagrees with its conclusions, it's based on a massive amount of evidence carefully gathered and analyzed.
It makes you wonder what other evidence might be out there, stuff that wasn't included in the report.
Right. This is just a glimpse of what they've likely found.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole mystery of the unnamed co-conspirators.
Oh, yeah.
Who were they and what did they do?
So many unanswered questions.
It's like a puzzle with some pieces missing.
Let's talk more about Trump's reaction to the report.
Sure.
What were his main defenses, and did they hold up under scrutiny?
As you might expect, Trump denied everything. His legal team insisted that the whole investigation was a political witch hunt.
Wow.
Meant to ruin his reputation and stop him from running for office again.
So they were portraying him as the victim.
Exactly.
Wow.
They claimed Smith was biased.
Okay.
That he cherry-picks evidence to fit a predetermined story. And that it was all a plot by the Biden administration to take him down.
But Smith denied all of that, right?
Completely. He insisted that the investigation was impartial.
Okay.
And based on facts, not politics, he pointed to that mountain of evidence as proof that this was a serious investigation.
Yeah.
Not some random attack.
It's interesting how both sides were trying to control the narrative to influence how the public viewed this whole thing.
It's all part of the game, especially with a case that's this politically charged.
Yeah.
Trump also tried to minimize what he did, saying his challenges to the election were protected by the First Amendment.
Okay.
His right to free speech.
Which, like we discussed before, is true to a certain extent. But the prosecution argued that his speech went beyond just voicing his opinion.
Right. They claimed his words actually incited violence.
Yeah.
And were part of a bigger plan to overturn the election.
So it becomes a question of where we draw the line between free speech
exactly
and inciting criminal activity. Not an easy line to draw.
Definitely not. And that's a debate that's probably going to go on for a long time, way beyond this specific case.
Yeah, that's true. One of the strongest points Smith makes in the report is about how not prosecuting Trump would set a dangerous precedent for future elections.
Absolutely.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
What did he mean by that?
He's basically saying that if a president can try to overturn an election and face zero consequences, it weakens our entire democracy. It sends the message that it's okay to try to cheat the system.
So he was saying that this case wasn't just about Trump.
Right.
It was about protecting the integrity of our whole electoral process.
Absolutely. It makes you ask yourself, what kind of message does it send if someone can try to undermine democracy and get away with it?
That's a question everyone listening needs to think about.
It's not just about the law. It's about morals and ethics. It's about what kind of country we want to be.
Right.
And Smith didn't just focus on Trump.
Okay.
He emphasized the importance of accountability for anyone involved in efforts to mess with the election.
So he wasn't just going after the big guy. He was saying anyone who broke the law should face consequences no matter who they are.
Exactly. He was sending a clear message. No one is above the law. It doesn't matter what position you hold or which political party you belong to.
Right.
You're responsible for your actions, and that's crucial for a healthy democracy.
Thinking about all this, I can't help but consider the bigger picture surrounding this investigation. This was all happening during a really crazy time with tons of political division and social unrest. How did that affect how people viewed this case?
That's an important point. This wasn't just a legal fight. Right.
It was unfolding against a backdrop of huge divisions in our society.
We were dealing with a pandemic.
Yeah.
A shaky economy.
Right.
Racial tension and a super close election. It was like everything was on edge.
It was a tense time for sure. And that context definitely influenced how people saw this case. It became a symbol of all the other fights happening in the country.
So depending on your political views, you might have seen the investigation as a righteous crusade for justice or a politically motivated attack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It became a sort of litmus test for your political beliefs.
And that makes it almost impossible to have a level-headed, objective conversation about what actually happened.
Absolutely. People came into it with strong opinions and biases.
Yeah.
Making it difficult to focus on the facts.
And we can't forget about the role social media played in all of this. We all know Trump was a master of using Twitter to sway public opinion and attack his rivals.
You're right. The report actually highlights how his tweets became a key part of the investigation.
Wow. They were both evidence of what he was thinking.
Co-answer?
And a way for him to potentially intimidate witnesses.
It's crazy to think they were analyzing his tweets to figure out what he was planning and whether he was involved in anything illegal.
It shows how much our communication has changed.
Yeah.
But it also highlights how easily social media can be used to manipulate people and potentially interfere with justice.
That's the point.
They had to figure out how to get to the truth.
Right.
While dealing with Trump's ability to use Twitter to rile up his supporters.
Yeah.
And maybe even influence the outcome of the investigation.
It's a reminder that social media is a powerful tool, but it can also be used for some pretty shady stuff, especially when it comes to politics.
No doubt about it. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It can be great for communication and organizing people.
Right.
But it can also be a weapon for spreading lies, stirring up conflict.
Yeah.
And messing with democracy.
You know, thinking about all of this, I wonder what happens next. The case against Trump was dropped. But does this report open the door for other legal action or investigations?
That's the big question, and one that'll keep legal experts busy for years to come.
I bet.
While Trump might not face more charges related to this specific stuff, the report could be a starting point for other investigations.
Interesting.
Or even civil lawsuits.
So this might not be the end of the story.
Not at all. The report uncovered a lot of potential wrongdoing.
Yeah.
And it's possible that others involved in these efforts to overturn the election could still face legal consequences.
And it could also lead to changes in laws or even reforms to our voting system.
Absolutely.
To prevent something like this from happening again.
Definitely. The report highlights some weaknesses in our system.
Yeah.
And it's up to lawmakers to fix those weaknesses and ensure that our elections are fair, secure, and truly reflect the will of the people.
It's a powerful reminder that democracy is something we have to actively work to protect.
Absolutely.
It's not a given. It requires constant vigilance.
Well said. This report has been a wake-up call, even with all the controversy surrounding it. Yeah. It's forcing us to face some hard truths about our democracy and the dangers it faces.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of information. We've explored the investigation, the legal battles, and the political maneuvering.
Right.
And it's been an intense but fascinating journey.
I agree. We've only just scratched the surface of a truly pivotal moment in American history.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll shift our focus to the future. We'll examine the potential long-term consequences of this report and consider its impact on American politics going forward. Stay tuned.
Okay, let's get into the legal weeds a little bit here.
Okay, yeah.
One area is campaign finance and election laws. The report shines a spotlight on how some folks were fundraising based on these election conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it was almost like a
Right.
It was almost like a business.
It was.
You know what I mean?
It was a grift in some ways, right? And it raises questions about whether the rules we have now are strong enough to prevent that kind of abuse.
Right. There were accusations of misleading fundraising appeals and potentially using campaign money illegally.
Exactly. This could push lawmakers to take a hard look at our campaign finance laws. Maybe we'll see stricter rules about how campaigns can get and spend money, or maybe there'll be a push for more transparency so voters can clearly see where the money is coming from and how it's being used.
So basically, this report could lead to some major changes in how we run elections in this country.
It's definitely a possibility, and that's not all. I think we could also see some ripple effects when it comes to social media companies and their role in elections.
Oh, yeah. That's been a hot-button issue for ages.
For sure, the report shows how platforms like Twitter were used to spread all sorts of misinformation and even incite violence related to the election. Remember all those attempts to bury accurate information about voting and amplify false claims?
Yeah, it was like a whole different reality playing out online for some folks.
Exactly, and this could lead to more calls for regulation of these social media giants, especially when it comes to political content and their impact on elections.
So we might see new laws holding these companies accountable for what's shared on their platforms.
I wouldn't be surprised this report has definitely added fuel to that fire. But beyond the legal and regulatory stuff, I think this whole thing has sparked a much broader conversation about the fragility of our democracy and the importance of everyone being involved, not just sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, it's like a wake-up call reminding us that democracy isn't a spectator sport.
Yeah.
We can't just assume it'll always be there.
Exactly. It requires active participation from all of us, a willingness to engage in thoughtful debate, and a commitment to upholding those core democratic values.
It's not enough to just vote every few years. We need to stay informed,
Mm-hmm.
be active in our communities, and be ready to call out those who threaten our democratic institutions.
I couldn't agree more. This report has created a sense of urgency, a realization that we can't take our democracy for granted. We have to fight for it, nurture it, and constantly be on guard against those who would try to undermine it.
I also think this report has forced us to confront how divided we are as a country and how that's making it harder to have reasonable conversations about important issues.
That's a huge problem. The report itself became this lightning rod with people instantly interpreting it based on their political leanings. It's almost like we can't even agree on basic facts anymore, let alone find common ground on solutions.
It's like we're speaking different languages, and if we can't have civil discourse, if we can't have honest debates based on facts and logic, it becomes so much easier for those in power to manipulate us and exploit those divisions for their own benefit.
You hit the nail on the head. That's a dangerous sign for any democracy. We need to find ways to listen to each other, even when we disagree, and try to build bridges across those divides.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together, and we need to figure out how to talk to each other, not just shout at each other. This report, while focused on a specific moment in time, has raised some really fundamental questions about truth accountability and the future of our democracy.
It's like throwing a stone into a pond and watching the ripples spurt out in all directions. This report has had that kind of impact, touching every aspect of our political and social lives.
And those ripples are going to keep spreading as we continue to debate the meaning of this report and grapple with the challenges it has exposed. This deep dive has been a wild ride. We've gone deep into the weeds of the investigation, explored the legal battles, and now considered the long-term implications for our democracy. There's been a lot to process, but I feel like I have a much clearer understanding of what happened, why it matters, and what's at stake.
It's been an intense journey, but an incredibly important one. And as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring this topic, read the full report, have conversations with people who hold different views, and form your own conclusions.
Because at the end of the day, the future of our democracy is in all of our hands. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Okay, so we've spent the last two parts of this deep dive, really getting into the nitty-gritty of Jack Smith's report.
Yeah.
The charges, the evidence, the political maneuvering, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
But now I'm curious what happens next. What are the long-term consequences of all of this?
That's the question everyone's asking. And the answer is probably going to unfold over years, maybe even decades.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, this report has the potential to shake things up, not just legally,
right,
but politically and socially too.
Okay, give me some specifics. Where do you see this report having the biggest impact?
Well, one area is campaign finance and election laws. The report shines a spotlight on how some folks were fundraising based on these election conspiracy theories.
Right.
And it raises questions about whether the rules we have now are strong enough to prevent abuse.
Right. There were accusations of misleading fundraising appeals and potentially using campaign money illegally.
Exactly. This could push lawmakers to take a hard look at our campaign finance laws. Maybe we'll see stricter rules about how campaigns can get and spend money.
Right.
Or maybe there will be a push for more transparency.
Yeah.
So voters can clearly see where the money's coming from and how it's being used.
So basically, this report could lead to some major changes in how we run elections in this country.
It's definitely a possibility, and that's not all.
Okay.
I think we could also see some ripple effects when it comes to social media companies and their role in elections.
Oh, yeah, that's been a hot button issue for ages.
For sure. The report shows how platforms like Twitter were used to spread all sorts of misinformation and even incite violence related to the election.
Right.
Remember all those attempts to bury accurate information about voting and amplify false claims?
Yeah, it was like a whole different reality playing out online for some folks.
Exactly. And this could lead to more calls for regulation of these social media giants, especially when it comes to political content and their impact on elections.
So we might see new laws holding these companies accountable for what's shared on their platforms.
I wouldn't be surprised. This report has definitely added fuel to that fire, but beyond the legal and regulatory stuff, I think this whole thing has sparked a much broader conversation about the fragility of our democracy and the importance of everyone being involved, not just sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, it's like a wake-up call reminding us that democracy isn't a spectator sport.
Right.
Yeah. We can't just assume it'll always be there.
Exactly. It requires active participation from all of us, a willingness to engage in thoughtful debate, and a commitment to upholding those core democratic values.
It's not enough to just vote every few years.
Right.
We need to stay informed, be active in our communities, and be ready to call out those who threaten our democratic institutions.
I couldn't agree more. This report has created a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
A realization that we can't take our democracy for granted.
Right.
We have to fight for it, nurture it, and constantly be on guard against those who would try to undermine it.
I also think this report has forced us to confront how divided we are as a country.
Yeah.
And how that's making it harder to have reasonable conversations about important issues.
That's a huge problem. The report itself became this lightning rod with people instantly interpreting it based on their political leanings.
Yeah.
It's almost like we can't even agree on basic facts anymore, let alone find common ground on solutions.
It's like we're speaking different languages. And if we can't have civil discourse, if we can't have honest debates based on facts and logic, it becomes so much easier for those in power to manipulate us and exploit those divisions for their own benefit.
You hit the nail on the head. That's a danger sign for any democracy.
Yeah.
We need to find ways to listen to each other, even when we disagree, and try to build bridges across those divides.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together, and we need to figure out how to talk to each other, not just shout at each other. This report, while focused on a specific moment in time, has raised some really fundamental questions about truth, accountability, and the future of our democracy.
It's like throwing a stone into a pond and watching the ripples spread out in all directions.
Yeah.
This report has had that kind of impact, touching every aspect of our political and social lives.
And those ripples are going to keep spreading as we continue to debate the meaning of this report.
Yeah.
And grapple with the challenges it has exposed.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. We've gone deep into the weeds of the investigation.
It has.
Explored the legal battles and now considered the long-term implications for our democracy. It's been a lot to process.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have a much clearer understanding of what happened, why it matters, and what's at stake.
It's been an intense journey, but an incredibly important one. And as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring this topic.
Yeah.
Read the full report. have conversations with people who hold different views, and form your own conclusions.
Because at the end of the day, the future of our democracy is in all of our hands.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.